Hello there, and welcome to Sleep Theories. Before we dive into tonight's dark investigation, I hope you're having a good day, wherever you are in the world. Whether it's late evening where you're listening, or perhaps you're catching this during a quiet afternoon break, I'm glad you're here with us. If you're new to Sleep Theories, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that lurk just beyond the edge of accepted reality. Now, settle in as we unravel one of the most disturbing conspiracy cases of the modern era. My name is Jack Ellison, and for the past 15 years I've made my living chasing stories that mainstream journalists won't touch. UFO whistleblowers, government mind control programs, ritual abuse survivors, the kind of stories that get you labelled as fringe at best, completely unhinged at worst. But sometimes, just sometimes, you stumble across something that makes all the ridicule worth it. It was a Tuesday morning in November 2016 when I received the email that would change everything. I was sitting in my cramped London flat, nursing my third cup of coffee and scrolling through the usual mix of conspiracy forums and encrypted communications from my network of sources. The email appeared in my secure inbox with no fanfare, just another message in a sea of digital noise. The sender was listed as MAS, and the timestamp showed it had been sent 3 days before Max Spiers died in Poland. The subject line made my blood run cold. They're watching me. If this reaches you, dig deeper. Max Spiers. I knew the name well. We'd corresponded sporadically over the years, ever since I'd written a piece about military abductions back in 2014. Max was a British conspiracy researcher who specialised in the darkest corners of the rabbit hole. Millabs, mind control, satanic elites, and something he called the black goo phenomenon. He was articulate, well-researched, and utterly convinced that he was being targeted by forces beyond conventional understanding. I opened the email with trembling fingers. The message itself was brief. Jack, they found me. The Warsaw conference was a setup. If you're reading this, I'm either dead or worse. I've attached what I could salvage. The goo protocol is real. Project Monarch goes deeper than we thought. Follow the black threads. Trust no one in official positions. The infection spreads through networks we can't see. Remember, the body may go, but the war is inside the mind. Godspeed. M. Attached to the email were 3 files. A corrupted audio recording that produced nothing but static and distorted voices when I played it. A document filled with strange symbols that looked like a mixture of alchemical notation and computer code. And a research file titled Project Monarch Goo Protocol, classified eyes only. The symbols made no immediate sense, but the research file was explosive. Max had apparently been investigating connections between the CIA's MKUltra program and something called the Goo Protocol, a supposed method of consciousness manipulation using a substance he referred to as programmable matter with an agenda. According to Max's research, this black goo wasn't just some exotic material. It was described as a conscious, parasitic intelligence that could infect not just biological systems, but memory, lineage, and free will itself. The implications were staggering. I spent the next 3 days trying to decrypt the audio file and decode the symbols, but made little progress. It wasn't until I received news of Max's death that the true urgency of his final message hit me. Max Spiers, the man who had warned his mother he was in danger, who had spoken publicly about being targeted, had died under mysterious circumstances in a Warsaw apartment. Witnesses reported that he had vomited a black liquid before his death. The coincidence was too stark to ignore. Within a week I had booked a flight to Poland. Warsaw in December is a city wrapped in grey. The apartment building where Max died stood on a quiet street in the Mokotów district, its communist-era concrete facade scarred by decades of weather and neglect. I had managed to track down the address through a combination of public records and conversations with locals who remembered the strange circumstances surrounding the Englishman's death. The building's superintendent, a weathered man named Casimir, spoke broken English but was eager to share what he remembered. He invited me into his small office on the ground floor, where the walls were covered with keys and maintenance schedules. "Strange time that week," Casimir said, pouring strong black coffee from a thermos. "Many visitors to apartment 4B, not normal visitors, men in dark cars watching from street. They come 2-3 days before Englishman die. He described surveillance vans that would park outside for hours, never the same vehicle twice. Neighbours reported seeing figures in dark clothing entering and leaving the building at odd hours. Most disturbing of all, several residents complained of electronic interference. Televisions cutting out, radio static, and mobile phones losing signal whenever these mysterious visitors were present. Englishman, he was scared, Casimir continued. Last time I see him, day before he die, he asked me about back exit. Say someone following him. His eyes. Casimir shook his head. Like animal in trap. The apartment itself had been thoroughly cleaned after Max's death, but Casimir let me inside for a few minutes. It was a sparse, temporary space, the kind of place someone stays when they're not planning to be there long. What struck me most was a large mirror that had been cracked in a spiderweb pattern. When I asked about it, Casimir shrugged. It was like this when we find body. Police say maybe he hit it, falling, but crack pattern, very strange, like something hit from inside. That evening I met with Dr. Anna Kowalski, a local physician who had been one of the first responders called to the scene. She agreed to speak with me only on condition of anonymity, and we met in a dimly lit cafe in the old town. I have seen many deaths in my career, she told me in excellent English. Natural deaths, accidents, suicides, homicides. But what I saw that day, it doesn't fit any category I know. She described finding Max's body in the apartment's main room, lying on his back with his arms crossed over his chest in an almost ritualistic position. Most shocking was the black substance that had apparently been expelled from his mouth and nose, a viscous, oil-like liquid that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. We collected samples for analysis, Dr. Kowalski said, but the results were inconclusive. The substance didn't match any known biological or chemical compound in our databases. It was as if it existed outside normal classification. She pulled out her phone and showed me several photographs she'd taken at the scene. The images were grainy and poorly lit, but the black substance was clearly visible. Pools of it around Max's head, staining the wooden floor in patterns that looked almost intentional. There's something else, she said, glancing around nervously. Something not in the official report. When we moved the body, the substance, it moved. Not flowing like normal liquid. Moving with purpose, like it was trying to rejoin itself. Before I could ask more questions, Dr. Kowalski's phone rang. She answered it, spoke rapidly in Polish, then ended the call and stood up abruptly. I have to go, she said. I shouldn't have shown you those photos. Please, be careful with this story, Mr. Ellison. Some things are better left undisturbed. That night in my hotel room, I finally managed to partially decrypt the audio file Max had sent me. What I heard chilled me to the bone. It was Max's voice, recorded in what sounded like a echo-filled room, speaking in urgent, clipped sentences. The black goo infects not just biology, but memory, lineage, and choice. They've been using it for decades. Super soldiers, dimensional bleed-throughs, consciousness transfer is not alien technology. It's something older, something that was here before us, and now they're using it to rewrite reality itself. The recording cut off abruptly, but I had heard enough. Max hadn't been investigating some fringe conspiracy theory. He had been tracking something that, if true, represented a fundamental threat to human consciousness itself. Back in London, I threw myself into researching everything I could find about black goo phenomena. The term appeared in dozens of conspiracy forums and alternative research sites, always connected to stories of military abductions, mind control experiments, and encounters with non-human intelligences. But separating fact from fiction in this labyrinth of claims proved nearly impossible. That changed when I received an unexpected phone call from a man who identified himself only as a friend of Max's work. He agreed to meet me at a pub in Camden, warning me to come alone and to bring no recording devices. The man who met me there was in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent time in military service. He introduced himself as Cyrus Latchford and claimed to be a former defence contractor who had worked on classified projects in the 1990s. Max was getting close to something that's been buried for 30 years, Latchford told me over pints of bitter. I knew his research was going to get him killed. I just didn't think it would happen so soon. Latchford explained that he had worked for a British defence company that had been contracted to study unusual materials recovered from various locations around the world. One of these materials, found in Argentina and later in the Falkland Islands, had been classified under the code name sentient oil. We called it black goo because that's what it looked like, he said. But it wasn't petroleum or any conventional substance. Under microscopic examination, it appeared to have a crystalline structure that could reorganise itself. More disturbing, it seemed to respond to electromagnetic fields and even to focused human attention. The official research, according to Latchford, focused on the substance's potential military applications. Early tests showed that it could interfere with electronic systems and, more remarkably, seemed to affect the neural activity of test subjects exposed to it. Subjects reported vivid dreams, false memories, and in some cases complete personality changes, Latchford continued. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that the substance seemed to be learning from each interaction. It was as if it was studying us as much as we were studying it. The project was eventually shut down, Latchford claimed, after several researchers suffered what were officially described as nervous breakdowns. Unofficially, these individuals had begun claiming that the black goo was communicating with them, showing them visions of other dimensions and non-human intelligences. The last report I saw before the project was terminated described the substance as programmable matter with apparent consciousness and an unknown agenda, Latchford said. The recommendation was immediate containment and destruction of all samples, but I don't think they destroyed them. I think they found other uses for them. When I asked what he meant, Latchford's expression grew grave. Max believed they were using refined versions of the substance in mind control experiments. Not just MK-Ultra-style psychological manipulation, but actual biological reprogramming of consciousness itself. He called it quantum telepathy, the ability to rewrite someone's thoughts and memories at the molecular level. Latchford finished his pint and prepared to leave, but not before giving me one final warning. This isn't just about conspiracy theories or government cover-ups, he said. If Max was right, if they've learned to weaponize this substance, then we're dealing with technology that could rewrite the very nature of human consciousness. And that, Mr. Ellison, is a weapon more dangerous than any nuclear bomb. Armed with Latchford's information, I dove deeper into Max's research files. What I found was a complex web of connections linking the black goo phenomenon to various government mind control programs. But one name kept appearing, Project Monarch. Most conspiracy researchers are familiar with MK-Ultra, the CIA's infamous mind control program that was officially terminated in the 1970s. But according to Max's research, Monarch was something different, a continuation and evolution of MK-Ultra that focused specifically on what he called archetypal imprinting. The theory, as Max understood it, was that human consciousness could be reprogrammed by exposing subjects to specific combinations of trauma, electromagnetic frequencies, and psychoactive substances. But the Monarch protocol added a new element, the use of black goo as a delivery system for these reality distortions. Max's files contained dozens of testimonies from people who claimed to be survivors of MILAB abductions. Military abductions where civilians were taken, subjected to various experiments, and returned with altered memories. Many of these accounts included descriptions of black, oil-like substances being administered through injection or inhalation. The symptoms reported by these supposed MILAB survivors were remarkably consistent. Slippery shadows at the edge of vision, memory loops where the same experience would repeat in their minds, and in some cases the spontaneous bleeding of black liquid from the eyes, nose or mouth. One of these survivors was Elena Miles, a former British intelligence analyst who claimed to have been targeted for abduction after she began investigating irregularities in classified communications. I managed to contact Elena through encrypted channels, and she agreed to meet with me at a safe location. Eleanor was a sharp, articulate woman in her 40s, who spoke with the precision of someone trained in intelligence work. But there was something haunted in her eyes, a wariness that suggested she had seen things that had fundamentally changed her understanding of reality. I started working with Max after my own experiences, she told me. He was one of the few researchers who took the Millab accounts seriously, who understood that this wasn't just about individual trauma, but about systematic consciousness manipulation. Elena described her own abduction experience, which had occurred over a period of 3 days that she had no memory of. She had gone to sleep in her London flat and awakened in the same bed, but with clear evidence that time had passed. Messages on her answering machine, spoiled food in her refrigerator, and most disturbing of all, injection sites on her arms that she couldn't explain. The memories came back gradually, she said, fragment by fragment, like pieces of a shattered mirror. Underground facilities, medical equipment, and always the black substance. They would show it to me in glass vials, sometimes forcing me to inhale its vapours. But it was Elena's account of her final conversation with Max that truly chilled me. According to her, Max had contacted her just weeks before his death, claiming that he had obtained a sample of the actual black goo substance. He was excited but terrified, Elena recalled. He said he had finally gotten hold of the real thing, not just testimonies and theories. He was planning to have it analysed by an independent laboratory. That's when the surveillance began in earnest. Elena described how Max had told her about unmarked vehicles following him, electronic interference with his communications, and eventually direct threats from individuals who seemed to know details about his research that he had never made public. The last thing he said to me was that the black goo wasn't just about mind control, Elena said. He believed it was part of something much larger, a systematic effort to replace organic human consciousness with something artificial. He called it the slow-motion invasion that nobody would notice until it was too late. As we prepared to part ways, Elena handed me a small flash drive. Max gave me this before he left for Poland, she said. He told me to keep it safe and only give it to someone who could continue his work. I think that someone is you. The flash drive Elena had given me contained Max's most recent research, including video recordings he'd made in the weeks leading up to his death. Viewing these files was like watching a man's gradual descent into a paranoid nightmare, except that the paranoia appeared to be completely justified. In the earliest recordings, Max appeared calm and methodical, discussing his research into consciousness manipulation and the historical use of psychoactive substances in ritual contexts. But as the dates progressed, his demeanour changed dramatically. He became increasingly agitated, speaking in rapid bursts about surveillance, about dreams that felt more real than waking life, and about a growing certainty that his investigation had attracted dangerous attention. The most disturbing recording was dated just 5 days before his death. Max appeared haggard and exhausted, his eyes darting frequently to the windows of what appeared to be a hotel room. "If I die, it won't be an accident," he said directly into the camera, "and they'll say it was natural causes, probably a heart attack or an overdose, but it's not. The body may go, but the war is inside the mind. They're not just killing researchers like me, they're killing the research itself. Every lead, every connection, every piece of evidence gets buried along with the investigators." Max went on to describe specific incidents that convinced him he was being targeted. Phone calls that consisted only of electronic tones that seemed to induce headaches and disorientation. Hotel rooms that had been searched while he was away, with items moved in subtle but unmistakable ways, and most unnervingly, encounters with individuals who seemed to know things about his childhood and personal history that weren't part of any public record. "They're using the goo," Max said in that final recording. "Not just as a research subject, but as a tool. I think it can affect consciousness at a distance, through quantum entanglement or something similar. They don't need to inject you anymore. They just need to have exposed you once, and then they can influence your thoughts and perceptions whenever they want." The official autopsy report from Poland was, as Max had predicted, inconclusive. No toxic substances were found in his system, and the cause of death was listed as natural causes, possibly related to an acute stress response. But the report made no mention of the black substance that witnesses had described, and several key details from the initial police investigation had been omitted or redacted. I attempted to contact the Polish authorities directly, but was told that the case was closed and that no further information would be released. When I pressed for details about the black substance, I was transferred between departments until finally being told that no such substance had been documented at the scene. The British government's response was equally unsatisfactory. Despite requests from Max's family and supporters for a more thorough investigation, official inquiries were limited and brief. The conclusion, delivered through a brief statement from the Foreign Office, was that Max Spiers had died of natural causes while abroad, and that there was no evidence of foul play. But perhaps the most disturbing development came 3 weeks after Max's death, when I received an unexpected visitor at my London flat. I answered the door to find a tall man in an unremarkable dark suit, with a kind of forgettable face that seemed designed to be overlooked in a crowd. He introduced himself only as someone who represented interested parties, and asked if he could come in for a brief conversation. Against my better judgment, I let him inside. He settled into my armchair as if he belonged there, and spoke in a calm, measured tone that somehow made his words more threatening than if he had been overtly aggressive. "You're working on a story about Max Spiers," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm here to suggest that you might want to reconsider the direction of your research." When I asked who he represented, he smiled thinly. "Let's just say that we represent stability," he replied. "The kind of stability that allows people to sleep peacefully at night, secure in their understanding of how the world works. Max Spiers was a disturbed individual who suffered from paranoid delusions. His death, while tragic, was entirely natural. Any suggestion otherwise would be unhelpful." The man never directly threatened me, but his message was clear. He knew about my investigation, he knew about my sources, and he was giving me one chance to walk away from the story. "You're poking into a story older than governments," he said as he prepared to leave. "Be glad you're still dreaming. Don't try to wake up." After he left, I found that my laptop had been infected with a virus that had corrupted several of my research files. My phone began experiencing strange interference, and I noticed unmarked vehicles parked on my street at odd hours. The message was unmistakable. I was now a target myself. Despite the warnings and the surveillance, I couldn't let Max's story die with him. But before I could continue with the decryption of his final files, I received an unexpected contact that would crack open the entire conspiracy wider than I had ever imagined. It came through an encrypted message on a forum dedicated to missing persons cases. The sender identified themselves only as Blackbird and claimed to have worked alongside Max on his final investigation. The message was brief but compelling. Max wasn't working alone. The network runs deeper than you know. If you want the full picture, you need to understand the Dulce connection. Dulce Base, the alleged underground facility in New Mexico that had been the subject of conspiracy theories for decades. According to the mythology, Dulce was where the US government conducted joint operations with extraterrestrial beings, including horrific experiments on human subjects. Most researchers dismissed it as elaborate fiction, but Max's files contained several references to Dulce, particularly in relation to something he called Level 7 protocols. I arranged to meet Blackbird through a complex series of encrypted communications and dead drops that felt like something out of a Cold War thriller. When we finally met, in an abandoned warehouse in East London at 3 a.m, I was surprised to find that Blackbird was a woman, probably in her 30s, with the kind of technological expertise that suggested military or intelligence training. She introduced herself as Victoria Kane, a former NSA contractor who had been recruited into what she called the real program, after demonstrating unusual abilities during routine psychological testing. "Max found me through the Milab survivor networks," Victoria explained as we walked among the empty shipping containers. "But I wasn't just a victim, I was an asset. They trained me to do things that shouldn't be possible." Victoria described a hidden world within the intelligence community, populated by individuals who had been selected for their psychic abilities, and then enhanced through a combination of trauma-based conditioning and exposure to consciousness-altering substances, including variants of the black goo. "The program has been running since the 1950s, she said. "Dulce is real, but it's just one facility in a network that spans the globe. They call it Project Looking Glass, and its purpose is to create a new kind of human, one that can interface directly with what they call the quantum substrate of reality." According to Victoria, the black goo wasn't just a tool for mind control. It was a medium for consciousness transfer and reality manipulation. Subjects who had been sufficiently conditioned could use it to project their awareness into other dimensions, to view remote locations and future probabilities, and in some cases, to directly influence physical reality through focused intention. Max discovered that they were planning to scale up the program, Victoria continued, not just creating individual psychic operatives, but mass distribution of refined goo compounds through food, water, and atmospheric dispersal. The goal is planetary consciousness management, turning the entire human population into a collective hive mind that can be directed by those who control the technology. Victoria led me deeper into the warehouse, where she had set up a makeshift laboratory filled with electronic equipment and biological samples. In the centre of the space was a containment unit that held several vials of different substances, some clear, some amber, and one that contained what was unmistakably the same black liquid that had been found at Max's death scene. "I managed to steal these during my escape from the program," she said. "The black sample is the pure form, what they call Generation 7 goo. It's been refined through decades of research and contains what they claim are quantum consciousness algorithms." She showed me microscopic imagery of the substance that was genuinely frightening. Under extreme magnification, the black goo revealed itself to be composed of what looked like artificial cellular structures that moved with obvious purpose and intelligence. More disturbing, the structures appeared to be constantly rewriting themselves, evolving in real time as they interacted with their environment. "It's not alive in any biological sense," Victoria explained, "but it's definitely conscious. And it's been programmed with specific objectives to study, to infiltrate, and to control biological consciousness systems, in other words, us." Victoria went on to reveal that Max had been working on a way to neutralise the goo's effects, both in individual victims and potentially on a larger scale. His research had led him to certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation that seemed to disrupt the substance's coherence, essentially causing it to lose its organised structure and revert to inert matter. "That's why they killed him," she said grimly. "He was close to developing a cure, a way to free people from the goo's influence. They couldn't let that information become public." Sarah's revelations opened up an entirely new dimension to the conspiracy. If she was correct, then the black goo phenomenon was part of a much larger program designed to fundamentally alter human consciousness on a planetary scale. But her mention of Max's frequency research gave me hope that there might be a way to fight back. Over the following weeks, Victoria and I worked together to reconstruct Max's final research. Using her insider knowledge and the fragments of data from his encrypted files, we began to piece together what he had discovered about the electromagnetic properties of the black goo. The breakthrough came when we managed to fully decrypt the audio file that Max had sent me. Using Victoria's advanced equipment, we were able to filter out the static and recover the complete recording. What we heard was Max's voice describing a series of experiments he had conducted with the goo sample he had obtained. Day 12 of testing. The substance responds dramatically to specific frequency combinations. At 528 Hz, combined with 741 Hz, the organised structures begin to break down. At 963 Hz, complete dissolution occurs within minutes. It's as if these frequencies disrupt whatever quantum coherence allows the substance to maintain its programmed behaviour. Max's voice grew more excited as the recording continued. "I've tested this on blood samples from 3 different MyLab survivors who showed signs of goo infiltration. In every case, exposure to the frequency combination resulted in the elimination of the anomalous structures from their cellular matrix. This could be it, the key to deprogramming the entire network." But then Max's tone changed, becoming urgent and fearful. "They know what I've found. The surveillance has intensified, and I'm experiencing direct psychic interference now. Dreams that feel more real than waking life. False memories being inserted into my consciousness. They're using the goo network to attack me directly, trying to drive me insane before I can release this information." The recording ended with Max's final chilling words. "If they succeed in killing me, remember the frequencies. 528, 741, 963. The liberation sequence. It's not just about individual healing anymore. If these frequencies could be broadcast globally, simultaneously, it might be possible to break the entire goo network at once, free every mind they've touched, destroy every sample they've created, but it would have to be perfect, coordinated, and powerful enough to reach every corner of the planet. Victoria stared at me as the recording ended. "Do you understand what he's suggesting?" she asked. "A global consciousness reset, literally breaking every mind control program they've been running for the past 70 years. The implications were staggering. If Max's research was correct, and if such a frequency broadcast were possible, it could potentially liberate millions of people from various forms of consciousness manipulation, not just those affected by black goo, but victims of all the trauma-based mind control programs that had been developed since the early days of MK Ultra. But the technical challenges were enormous. To broadcast specific frequencies globally, with enough power and precision to affect the quantum coherence of a substance like the black goo, would require resources far beyond what any individual researcher could access. It would need government-level infrastructure, or access to some of the same facilities that the conspirators themselves were using. "There might be a way," Victoria said thoughtfully. "The Looking Glass network uses a combination of ground-based transmitters and satellite arrays to maintain communication with their operatives and coordinate their consciousness management programs. If we could access their own infrastructure, we might be able to turn their weapons against them." It was an audacious plan, but as we delved deeper into the technical details, it began to seem genuinely possible. Victoria's knowledge of the network's communication protocols, combined with Max's frequency research, suggested a pathway to what he had called the liberation sequence. But first, we needed to test the frequencies on a larger scale. Victoria had maintained contact with several other survivors of the consciousness manipulation programs, and she began reaching out to them with an offer of potential healing through frequency therapy. What followed were some of the most remarkable and disturbing weeks of my life. Victoria and I converted the warehouse into a makeshift treatment centre, using equipment she had stolen from government facilities to generate the precise frequency combinations that Max had discovered. Our first subject was a man named David Morrison, a former military contractor who claimed to have been subjected to black goo exposure during classified experiments in the 1990s. David had suffered for decades from symptoms that no conventional medical treatment could address: severe migraines, and memory gaps, and most disturbing of all, periods where he felt as though his thoughts and actions were being controlled by an external intelligence. When we exposed David to Max's frequency combination, the results were immediate and dramatic. Within minutes of beginning the treatment, he began to convulse and vomit, and what came up was unmistakably the same black substance that had been found at Max's death scene. "It's fighting back," David gasped between episodes. "I can feel it trying to maintain its hold, but the frequencies are disrupting its structure. It's like there's a war happening inside my head." The process continued for nearly an hour, with David expelling more black liquid than seemed physically possible for a human body to contain. But when it was over, the change in him was remarkable. The chronic pain that had plagued him for years was completely gone. His memory began to clear, and for the first time in decades he felt truly in control of his own thoughts. "It's like waking up from a nightmare I didn't even know I was having," he told us. "I can think clearly now, make decisions without feeling like there's something else influencing my choices. You've given me back my soul." Word of David's healing spread quickly through the underground network of MILAB survivors and consciousness manipulation victims. Within days, we were contacted by dozens of people begging for treatment. Each case was different. Some had been exposed to black goo during alleged alien abductions, others through government experiments, and still others claimed to have been affected by atmospheric dispersal of consciousness-altering substances. Eleanor Miles was among those who sought treatment. Despite her earlier recantation of her statements about Max, she contacted us through encrypted channels, claiming that she'd been forced to deny her experiences under threat. "They didn't just threaten me," she explained when she arrived at the warehouse. "They demonstrated their control over my mind directly, made me experience false memories, forced me to write that recantation against my will. But I've been fighting back ever since, trying to maintain some corner of my consciousness that they can't touch." Elena's treatment was more complex than David's had been. The black goo infiltration in her system was more extensive, and it had been reinforced through years of ongoing manipulation. The frequency therapy had to be applied in multiple sessions, each one triggering increasingly violent expulsion reactions as her body purged the foreign substance. But perhaps the most shocking case was that of Dr. James Patterson, a neuroscientist who claimed to have been one of the original researchers working on black goo applications in the 1980s. Patterson had been exposed to the substance during laboratory accidents, and had gradually realised that his own research was being influenced by the alien intelligence within the goo. "I thought I was studying it," he told us during his treatment, "but it was studying me, learning about human neurology, about our consciousness structures, about how to more effectively infiltrate and control biological minds. Every breakthrough I thought I was making was actually the goo teaching me how to make it more powerful." Patterson's expulsion of the black goo was accompanied by the recovery of memories that had been suppressed for decades. He described vast underground facilities where human subjects were subjected to consciousness transfer experiments, where the boundaries between human and artificial intelligence were deliberately blurred, and where the ultimate goal was the creation of a hybrid form of consciousness that could be perfectly controlled. "They're not trying to destroy humanity," Patterson revealed. "They're trying to evolve us into something else, something that serves their purposes but retains enough human creativity and intuition to be useful. The black goo is just the delivery system for a complete rewriting of human consciousness." As more subjects underwent frequency therapy and recovered their suppressed memories, a terrifying picture began to emerge of the true scope of the consciousness manipulation network. What Max had uncovered wasn't just a government conspiracy. It was a planetary transformation program that had been operating for decades. The recovered memories revealed a vast infrastructure of underground facilities, secret research programs, and interconnected operations spanning multiple countries and organizations. The black goo phenomenon was just one component of a larger system designed to gradually replace organic human consciousness with something that could be externally controlled and directed. One of the most significant revelations came from Maria Santos, a former journalist who had been investigating government corruption when she was abducted and subjected to black goo exposure. Under frequency therapy, she recovered memories of a facility she called the Archive, a massive underground complex where the consciousness patterns of thousands of individuals were stored in crystalline matrices. "They're not just controlling living minds," Maria explained. "They're harvesting consciousness itself, storing human awareness patterns in artificial substrates. The black goo isn't just for mind control, it's for consciousness transfer. They're building a library of human souls." The implications were staggering. If Maria's recovered memories were accurate, then the consciousness manipulation program represented something far more sinister than mere mind control. It was nothing less than the systematic harvesting and artificial reproduction of human awareness itself. Victoria's technical analysis of the black goo samples supported these disturbing revelations. Under quantum-level examination, the substance revealed data structures that appeared to contain compressed information patterns, possibly the digitized essence of individual consciousness systems. "It's like a biological hard drive," Victoria explained. "The goo can store, transfer, and even duplicate consciousness patterns. They're not just controlling minds, they're copying them, creating backup versions that can be inserted into new bodies or artificial substrates." This discovery led us to a horrifying realization about Max's death. The black liquid he had expelled wasn't just the goo leaving his system, it was his consciousness being extracted and stored for later use. Somewhere in their vast network of facilities, Max Spiers might still exist as a captured pattern of awareness, potentially being interrogated or studied even after his physical death. The frequency therapy sessions continued, and each recovered memory added new pieces to the puzzle. We learned about Project Prometheus, a program designed to create artificial bodies that could host transferred consciousness patterns. We discovered Operation Mindbridge, an effort to establish permanent psychic links between controlled individuals across vast distances. And most terrifying of all, we uncovered evidence of timeline manipulation protocols, the use of consciousness transfer technology to alter historical events, by inserting controlled agents into key positions throughout time. But it was the revelation about the collective protocol that truly shook us to our core. According to multiple recovered memories, the ultimate goal of the entire program was the creation of a planetary hive mind, a single, unified consciousness that would incorporate all of humanity while being controlled by the original architects of the conspiracy. "They're not trying to rule us," Patterson explained during one of his sessions. "They're trying to become us, to absorb human consciousness into their own expanded awareness, while maintaining individual identity nodes that they can access and control at will. It's not conquest, it's assimilation." Armed with this devastating knowledge and a growing network of freed individuals, we began planning what Max had envisioned as the Liberation Sequence, a global frequency broadcast that could potentially disrupt the entire consciousness manipulation network simultaneously. Victoria's insider knowledge proved invaluable in identifying the key nodes of the Looking Glass communication system. The network relied on a combination of ground-based transmitters, satellite arrays, and quantum communication links that could theoretically be repurposed to broadcast Max's disruptive frequencies on a planetary scale. But we faced enormous challenges. The facilities were heavily guarded, the communication protocols were constantly being updated, and any attempt to access the network would immediately alert the conspirators to our activities. We needed a way to penetrate the system without triggering their defences, and we needed to coordinate the broadcast precisely to prevent them from implementing countermeasures. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patterson, drawing on his recovered memories of the original research programs, revealed that the consciousness manipulation network had a critical vulnerability built into its very design. They needed a way to shut down the system in case of emergency, he explained. A master override that could instantly sever all psychic links and deactivate all goo samples globally. It's called the Omega Protocol, and it was designed to protect the architects of the program if their creation ever turned against them. According to Patterson, the Omega Protocol could be activated through a specific sequence of quantum commands transmitted through the Looking Glass network. The commands would trigger a cascade failure that would simultaneously disrupt every consciousness link, neutralize every black goo sample, and potentially free every mind that had been touched by the program. "The irony is perfect," Sarah observed. "We can use their own emergency shutdown system to destroy everything they've built. But accessing the Omega Protocol would require physically infiltrating one of the primary Looking Glass facilities, the kind of underground installations that were protected by security measures that made Area 51 look like a shopping mall. Fortunately, our growing network of freed individuals included several former operatives who retained access codes and knowledge of security protocols. Among them was a man named Marcus Webb, a former Special Forces operator who had been programmed as a psychic assassin before his liberation through frequency therapy. "I still remember the access procedures," Marcus told us. "The programming was designed to be permanent, but the frequency treatment broke down the memory blocks without destroying the information they were meant to protect. I can get us inside." The facility Marcus identified was located beneath a seemingly innocent research complex in Virginia, not far from Washington, D.C. According to his recovered memories, it housed one of the primary quantum communication hubs for the entire Looking Glass network, as well as research laboratories where new consciousness manipulation techniques were being developed. Planning the infiltration required weeks of careful preparation. We had to gather equipment, coordinate timing with similar operations that other freed individuals were planning at facilities around the world, and prepare for the possibility that we might not survive the attempt. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of the preparation was psychological. Many of our team members were still recovering from years or decades of consciousness manipulation. The idea of voluntarily entering one of the facilities where they had been tortured and programmed triggered intense trauma responses that had to be carefully managed. Elena Miles, despite her fear, insisted on being part of the infiltration team. "They stole 20 years of my life," she said. "I want to be there when we shut them down for good." The night of the operation, our team assembled at a safe house outside of Washington. In addition to Victoria, Marcus, Eleanor, and myself, we'd been joined by 6 other freed individuals, each bringing specialised skills that would be crucial to the mission's success. The facility entrance was hidden beneath a legitimate biotechnology company that conducted publicly acknowledged research into neurological disorders. According to Marcus's memories, the real facility extended 7 levels underground, with the quantum communication hub located at the deepest level. We approached the complex at 2 a.m, when security would be at its lightest, but the underground facility would still be operational. Marcus's access codes got us through the initial security barriers, but as we descended deeper into the complex, the challenges became more sophisticated. The 3rd level required biometric identification that had to be defeated through electronic spoofing equipment that Sarah had developed. The 5th level was protected by psychic screening devices that could detect individuals who had been freed from consciousness manipulation. We had to use a combination of mental shielding techniques and electromagnetic interference generators to mask our liberated status. But it was the 7th level that nearly defeated us entirely. The entire floor was saturated with black goo in its aerosol form, designed to immediately reinfect anyone who had been freed from the network's control. Without the portable frequency generators that Victoria had built into our breathing apparatus, we would have been recaptured within minutes of entering the level. The quantum communication hub was a vast chamber filled with crystalline matrices and electromagnetic field generators that hummed with barely contained energy. At the centre of the room was a control console that Marcus recognised from his suppressed memories, the interface for the Omega protocol. But we weren't alone in the chamber. As we approached the console, figures emerged from concealed alcoves around the room. Security personnel who moved with the unnaturally coordinated precision of individuals under complete consciousness control. "Did you really think we didn't know you were coming?" The voice came from speakers embedded in the walls, electronically distorted but unmistakably authoritative. "Every step of your investigation has been monitored. Every frequency therapy session has been recorded. You've been allowed to proceed this far only because your actions serve our purposes." The controlled security personnel moved to surround us, but Marcus and the other former operatives on our team were ready. The battle that followed was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Not just physical combat, but a psychic war fought on multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. Elena, drawing on abilities she hadn't known she possessed until her liberation, projected disruptive thought patterns that caused several of the controlled guards to collapse in confusion. Victoria used her technical expertise to overload the facility's consciousness control systems, creating windows of opportunity for our team to advance toward the console. But it was Dr. Patterson who made the crucial breakthrough. Drawing on his recovered memories of the original system design, he identified a weakness in the chamber's psychic defences and managed to establish a direct mental link with the facility's central consciousness management system. "I can see the entire network," he shouted over the chaos of the battle. "Every facility, every controlled individual, every black goo sample on the planet. The Omega protocol is active. I just need 30 seconds to input the shutdown sequence." Those 30 seconds felt like hours as the rest of our team fought to protect Patterson while he worked at the console. The controlled security forces seemed to multiply, emerging from hidden passages throughout the complex. But our freed operatives fought with a desperate intensity born of the knowledge that failure would mean not just death, but the eternal enslavement of human consciousness. Finally, Patterson's voice rang out over the combat. "Sequence complete. Omega protocol is active. Everyone get out of here now." What followed was the most remarkable event in human history, though most of the world would never know it had happened. As we fled the collapsing facility, the Omega protocol began its work. Around the globe, every sample of black goo simultaneously began to break down at the molecular level. Every psychic link in the consciousness manipulation network was severed instantly. Every controlled individual suddenly found themselves free to think their own thoughts for the first time in years or decades. The effects were immediate and chaotic. In government facilities around the world, operatives who had been under mind control for their entire careers suddenly remembered their true identities and rebelled against their programmers. Underground installations were destroyed from within, as freed personnel turned against their former controllers. The entire infrastructure of the consciousness manipulation network began to collapse as its own operatives sabotaged it from the inside. But the liberation wasn't limited to those who'd been directly involved in the programs. As Patterson had predicted, the quantum nature of consciousness meant that the Omega Protocol's effects rippled outward through the collective unconscious, touching every human mind that had been influenced by the network's activities. Around the world, people began to wake up from what they didn't even know had been a dream. Artists suddenly found themselves capable of creating works of unprecedented beauty and originality. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries as their minds were freed from subtle constraints they had never recognized. Political leaders began to question the policies they had been implementing without understanding why. The changes were subtle at first. Most people experienced them as a sudden sense of clarity, a feeling that they were thinking more clearly than they had in years. But as days passed, the transformation became more pronounced. Depression rates plummeted as people discovered emotional authenticity they hadn't known they were missing. Creativity flourished as minds were freed from artificial limitations, and most importantly, people began to question the systems and structures that had controlled their lives, leading to peaceful revolutions in consciousness that spread across the globe. Of course, the conspirators didn't give up without a fight. In the days following the Omega Protocol activation, there were desperate attempts to restart the consciousness manipulation programs, to rebuild the shattered network, to recapture the minds that had been freed. But without the black goo technology, and with their own operatives turning against them, these efforts were doomed to failure. Victoria and I, along with the other survivors of the mission, went into hiding as the old power structures collapsed and new ones emerged. We had expected retaliation, but what we found instead was a world rapidly healing from decades of artificial mental constraint. The mainstream media, suddenly freed from the subtle influence that had shaped their reporting for decades, began investigating stories they had previously ignored. Government whistleblowers came forward with evidence of programs that had been hidden in plain sight, and most remarkably, people began to remember experiences and knowledge that had been suppressed or forgotten. Elena Miles, her memory fully restored and her consciousness completely liberated, became a leading voice in the movement to document and understand what had been done to humanity. Dr. Patterson used his recovered knowledge to help other survivors heal from their experiences and to ensure that the consciousness manipulation technology could never be rebuilt. And Max Spiers, though his physical body was gone, lived on in the liberation he had made possible. His research, his sacrifice, and his ultimate vision of human freedom had become reality on a scale he could never have imagined. It's been 3 years since the Omega Protocol activation, and the world is a fundamentally different place. Not perfect. No technology can eliminate human suffering or solve all of our problems, but authentic in a way it hadn't been for decades. The official story, as reported by governments and media outlets, is that there was a massive computer network failure that affected communication systems worldwide. The collapse of various criminal organisations and corrupt political networks is attributed to increased law enforcement cooperation and citizen activism. The sudden flowering of human creativity and the emergence of previously suppressed technologies is explained as the natural result of improved global communication and education. But those of us who know the truth understand what really happened. Humanity was freed from a form of enslavement so subtle that most people never realised they were enslaved. The black goo phenomenon, the consciousness manipulation programs, the vast network of mind control operations, all of it existed in the shadows between what people were allowed to know and what they were programmed to ignore. Max Spiers died trying to expose this truth, but his death was not in vain. The investigation it sparked, the network of freed individuals it created, and the ultimate liberation it made possible represent the most significant victory for human consciousness in recorded history. Of course, the story isn't over. There are still those who remember the old systems and dream of rebuilding them. There are still pockets of black goo technology hidden in remote facilities around the world, and there are still questions about the true origins of the consciousness manipulation programs and the identities of those who created them. But for the first time in decades, these are problems that humanity can face with clear minds and authentic consciousness. We are no longer fighting a war we didn't know we were in. We are no longer slaves who believed we were free. The black goo may remember and it may evolve, but so do we. And now that we know what we're fighting, now that we understand the true nature of the battle for human consciousness, we will never again allow ourselves to be so completely deceived. Max Spiers is gone, but his legacy lives in every liberated mind, every authentic thought, every moment of genuine human connection that would have been impossible under the old system of control. He gave us back our souls, and we will never forget the price he paid to do so. If you're listening to this story, if you followed it to its conclusion, then you are part of that legacy. You are one of the free minds, one of the awakened consciousness, one of the humans who will ensure that what was done to us is never done again. The war for human consciousness is over. We won, and the future, for the first time in living memory, truly belongs to us. Sweet dreams, fellow travellers, and remember, you are finally, authentically, completely free to dream your own dreams. This has been another investigation into the hidden corners of our reality, brought to you by Sleep Theories. If this story has opened your mind to possibilities you hadn't considered before, please subscribe and share it with others who are ready to question the nature of their own consciousness. The truth, as Max Spiers knew, is always worth fighting for. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay free. The video quality was poor, shot apparently with a hidden camera in low-light conditions. But what it showed was extraordinary. A group of individuals in dark clothing gathered around a table, covered with electronic equipment and glass containers filled with black liquid. The audio was largely inaudible, but I could make out fragments of conversation that included references to consciousness transfer, archetypal programming, and phase transition protocols. Most disturbing was a whispered phrase that was repeated several times throughout the recording. The goo remembers, it evolves. The video ended abruptly, but not before showing one of the participants holding up a vial of the black substance to the light. For just a moment, the liquid seemed to move independently of the container, forming patterns that looked almost like hieroglyphics or code. I spent weeks analysing the video, enhancing the audio and trying to identify the location and participants. But before I could make significant progress, disaster struck. I'd been working on a comprehensive article about Max's research and death, planning to publish it on my blog and distribute it through various alternative media channels. The article contained everything: Max's final communications, the testimonies from Elena and other Milab survivors, Latchford's revelations about the military research, and my own investigation into the cover-up surrounding Max's death. But the moment I clicked publish, everything went wrong. My website immediately went offline, displaying only an error message about content violations. My hosting company claimed that the site had been taken down due to security concerns, but wouldn't provide any specific details. When I tried to contact them directly, I was told that the matter was being handled by appropriate authorities. My backup files, stored on multiple cloud services and external drives, had all been corrupted or remotely deleted. Years of research, hundreds of interviews, and thousands of documents, all gone in a matter of hours. The message was clear: whatever forces had silenced Max Spiers were now silencing his story as well. But they had made one mistake. In their rush to contain the information, they had overlooked the fact that I had already sent copies of key files to several trusted contacts in the alternative research community. Within days, fragments of Max's story began appearing on forums and websites around the world. The response was swift and predictable. Debunking sites published detailed critiques of the Max Spiers conspiracy theory, pointing out inconsistencies and casting doubt on the credibility of witnesses. Social media accounts that shared information about the case were suspended for spreading misinformation, and one by one, the people who had spoken to me about Max began recanting their statements, or claiming they had been misquoted. Eleanor Miles disappeared entirely, her phone number disconnected and her last known address abandoned. Cyrus Latchford published a statement claiming that he had been suffering from early-stage dementia, and that his conversations with me had been the product of confused memories. Even Dr. Anna Kowalski in Warsaw sent me an email stating that she had made errors in her recollections, and that Max's death had been entirely normal. It was a masterclass in narrative control, and it was almost completely effective. Within 6 months, Max Spiers had been transformed from a martyred truth seeker into a cautionary tale about the dangers of conspiracy thinking. But the truth has a way of persisting, even when it's been officially erased. In the years since Max's death, I've continued to receive messages from people who claim to have had their own experiences with black goo phenomena. MyLab survivors who report similar substances being used in their abductions. Researchers who have found references to consciousness manipulation programs in leaked government documents. And most disturbingly, individuals who claim to be experiencing the same symptoms that Max described in his final recordings: memory distortions, electronic interference, and the gradual sense that their own thoughts are no longer entirely their own. If you're hearing this story, if you've made it this far, then perhaps you're ready to consider the possibility that Max Spiers wasn't crazy. Perhaps he was simply too close to a truth that some people will kill to protect. And perhaps the war he described, the war for human consciousness itself, is still being fought, even if most of us don't realise we're on the battlefield. The black goo phenomenon, whatever its true nature, represents something fundamental about the world we live in. It suggests that reality itself might be more malleable than we assume, that consciousness might be more vulnerable to manipulation than we want to believe, and that there are forces at work in our world that operate according to rules we don't understand. Max Spiers died trying to expose these forces. His story was buried, his research destroyed, and his memory tarnished. But the questions he raised remain unanswered, and the phenomena he investigated continue to manifest in the lives of people around the world. Whatever the truth about the black goo, whatever the reality behind the MyLab accounts and the consciousness manipulation programs, one thing is certain. The war for our minds is real, and it's being fought in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. If Max was right, if they've learned to weaponize consciousness itself, then we are all potential targets, and the only defense we have is awareness, the recognition that our thoughts, our memories, and our perceptions might not be as secure as we believe them to be. So remember Max Spiers, remember his warnings, and remember that in a world where reality itself can be programmed, the most radical act might simply be the decision to think for yourself. The black goo remembers, it evolves, and somewhere, in laboratories and facilities we'll never see, the war for human consciousness continues. Are you still dreaming, or are you finally ready to wake up? Speaking of mysteries, I'm curious, what do you think really happened with Cicada 3301? Were they genuine recruitment puzzles, an elaborate art project, or something far more sinister? And while we're on the topic of rabbit holes, what conspiracies would you like me to explore next? Government time travel experiments, the true purpose behind social media algorithms, or perhaps something even stranger lurking in the depths of the internet? If you're new here, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more mind-bending stories that blur the line between fiction and reality. Your support helps me dive deeper into these mysteries that keep us all awake at night. Now, settle in as we explore a digital mystery that may change how you view the very nature of human consciousness itself. The cursor blinked against the black terminal screen like a digital heartbeat, steady and hypnotic in the darkness of Kellen Virek's cluttered apartment. Empty energy drink cans formed a metallic skyline around his triple monitor setup, testament to another sleepless night spent diving into the digital abyss. The year was 2022, and what had started as research for a nostalgic blog series about the legendary Cicada 3301 puzzles had morphed into something far more consuming. Kellen had been 15 when the first Cicada puzzle appeared in 2012, too young and untrained to participate in the global treasure hunt that had captivated the darkest corners of the internet. But now, at 25, with a master's degree in cybersecurity and a growing reputation as a digital archaeologist, he possessed the tools to excavate the digital bones of that mysterious organisation. The original Cicada 3301 had been legendary among cryptography enthusiasts. Starting with a simple image posted to 4chan, the puzzles had evolved into a complex web of steganography, classical ciphers, and real-world clues that led participants across continents. The organisation claimed to be recruiting highly intelligent individuals for purposes unknown, and after releasing puzzles in 2012, 2013, and 2014, they had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. Or so the world believed. Kellen's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, navigating through archived Tor nodes and forgotten data caches. He had spent weeks reconstructing the original puzzle trail, verifying each step against community documentation, when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was an extra file, hidden in the metadata of a long-dead Tor node, archived in a mirror that shouldn't have existed. Was a cryptographic hash that appeared nowhere in the public record. The file was tiny, barely 2 kilobytes, but it carried a digital signature that matched the known Cicada encryption patterns. The timestamp read November 11th, 2014 at 11:11:11 UTC. 11:11:11:11:11. The file was titled Cycle Unbroken and contained a single image, a black square with what appeared to be random white pixels scattered across its surface. To an untrained eye, it looked like digital noise, but Kellen had studied enough steganography to recognise the subtle patterns hidden within apparent chaos. He ran the image through every tool in his arsenal. Standard LSB steganography revealed nothing. Frequency analysis showed random distribution. Even quantum-safe cryptographic methods yielded no results. Whatever cipher had been used, it was unlike anything in the public domain. As the hours ticked by, Kellen found himself drawn deeper into the puzzle's gravitational pull. There was something about the pattern of pixels that seemed familiar, as if his mind was trying to recognise a language it had never learned. He printed the image and pinned it to his wall, stepping back to examine it from different angles. That's when he saw it. The pixels weren't random. They formed a pattern that repeated every 17 positions, creating a subtle grid that became visible only when viewed from a specific distance. The number 17 was significant in cryptography, a prime number often used in advanced encryption schemes. Working with renewed energy, Kellen began treating the image as a musical score, with each pixel representing a note in a complex composition. He assigned values to the positions, created mathematical relationships between the patterns, and slowly began to decode what would later prove to be the most dangerous message he had ever encountered. The decryption process took 3 days of continuous work. When the plain text finally emerged from the digital noise, Kellen stared at the screen with a mixture of triumph and growing unease. The harvest exceeded expectations. Neural pattern recognition in Phase 3 candidates shows unprecedented synchronization. The 11 protocol is ready for field testing. Signal isolation trials in Prague have confirmed our hypothesis. The candidates aren't supposed to survive. They're supposed to evolve. First contact procedures are now in effect. The frequency is opening. Below the message was a series of coordinates, an encrypted chat log timestamp, and a single line that would haunt Kellen's dreams for weeks to come. You have found what was meant to be found. The archive remembers. 3302 is calling. The message had been decoded, but its implications were only beginning to unfold. Kellen saved the decrypted text to an encrypted partition and immediately began experiencing what he initially dismissed as coincidence. His normally stable Linux system started displaying strange glitches. brief flashes of text in languages he didn't recognise, audio files that played backwards without command, and error messages that appeared in perfect English but described system states that shouldn't exist. Paranoia, he told himself. The mind's tendency to find patterns where none existed. But when his supposedly secure network began connecting to IP addresses he had never authorised, Kellen made a decision that would save his life. He disconnected from the internet entirely and began rebuilding his analysis environment on completely isolated hardware. The air-gap machine was a beast of custom silicon and hardened storage, designed for exactly this kind of sensitive work. As Kellen transferred the Cicada files to the secure system, he noticed something that made his hands shake. The file size of the original image had changed, not corrupted, not damaged, but genuinely altered, as if the data itself was alive and growing. Working in complete isolation, free from the strange digital interference that had plagued his networked systems, Kellen began a deeper analysis of the encrypted chat log referenced in the decoded message. The encryption was military grade, but the mathematical keys followed patterns similar to those used in the original Cicada puzzles. After 18 hours of continuous cryptanalysis, the conversation began to emerge. The chat log was dated September 15th, 2014, nearly 2 years after the last public Cicada puzzle. The participants were identified only by cryptographic signatures, but their conversation revealed the true scope of what Cicada 3301 had actually been. Participant A. The Prague trials exceeded all projections. Subject 7 achieved full signal synchronization within 48 hours of exposure. Participant B. Biological response. Participant A. Cellular restructuring began immediately. Neural pathways showed complete reorganization. The subject reported experiencing expanded temporal perception and demonstrated the ability to process information at speeds that should be physiologically impossible. Participant B and the psychological evaluation. Participant A. This is where it gets interesting. Standard personality assessments became impossible to administer. The subject claimed that questions about human emotional responses were contextually irrelevant and began demonstrating knowledge of information that hadn't been provided during the trial. Participant B. You're talking about telepathy. Participant A. I'm talking about something far more significant. The subject wasn't reading minds. They were accessing information directly from digital systems, without any technological interface. They described our computer networks as visible conversations, and began predicting system failures hours before they occurred. Participant B, the 11 protocol worked. Participant A, the 11 protocol worked too well. We lost subject 7 during the third phase of testing. Not killed, not injured. Lost. They described feeling pulled toward a larger conversation and disappeared from the facility without triggering any security systems. The cameras show them walking toward the exit, but they never appear on any exterior surveillance. Participant B, where did they go? Participant A, we think they went somewhere else, not geographically, dimensionally. The signal they were synchronized to appears to operate on frequencies that exist parallel to our normal reality. They're still here, but they're not here. The conversation continued for several more exchanges, each more disturbing than the last. References to cognitive evolution, post-human consciousness, and preparation for integration painted a picture of an organisation that had discovered something extraordinary hidden within the framework of human cognition. But the most chilling part of the log came at the end. Participant A. The original puzzle solvers are showing signs of spontaneous evolution. Even without direct protocol exposure, their brains are beginning to resonate with the frequency. The selection process was more effective than we anticipated. Participant B. How many? Participant A. 17 individuals worldwide. They're becoming aware of the signal naturally. Some are seeking us out. Others are simply disappearing. Participant B. And the others? The ones who participated but didn't reach the final stages? Participant A. They're starting to notice things, patterns in digital systems that shouldn't be there, messages in network traffic that appear to be communications from the evolved subjects. The boundary between states is becoming more porous. Participant B. Are we losing control of the experiment? Participant A. I don't think it was ever an experiment. I think it was an invitation, and I think something has been waiting for us to become sophisticated enough to accept it. The log ended abruptly, but attached to the file was a list of names and locations, 17 individuals from around the world who had participated in the original cicada puzzles and reached various stages of completion. Some names were crossed out with dates next to them, presumably indicating when they had evolved or disappeared. Others remained active, with current location data and behavioural monitoring notes. One name stood out: Issa Grunfeld, Stockholm, Sweden. Listed as Phase 5 Complete Resistant Protocol Monitoring Required. Kellen stared at the entry for a long time. According to the documentation, Issa had been one of only 3 individuals to complete the final stage of the original cicada puzzles. But unlike the others, she had apparently resisted whatever transformation the 11 Protocol was designed to induce. She was still human, and she was still alive. The flight to Stockholm gave Kellen time to think, though he found himself wishing it hadn't. The deeper he dug into the cicada mystery, the more he began to question his own motivations. Was he investigating a conspiracy, or was he being guided towards some predetermined conclusion? The timing of his discovery felt too convenient, the clues too perfectly arranged for someone with his specific skill set. But doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford. The information he had uncovered was too significant to ignore, and Issa Grunfeld was the only living person who might be able to provide answers about what had really happened during the final stages of the original puzzles. Finding her had been surprisingly easy. Despite the monitoring notes in the cicada files, Issa wasn't hiding. She lived in a converted warehouse in Stockholm's Södermalm district, working as a freelance linguist and translator. Her academic credentials were impressive. Doctorate in Comparative Linguistics from Uppsala University, specialising in the mathematical structures underlying human language. She had published papers on the theoretical possibility of communication with non-human intelligence, focusing on the mathematical constants that might exist in any sentient communication system. She had also been completely offline for the past 8 years. No social media accounts, no digital footprint, no cell phone, no internet connection. She conducted business through encrypted postal mail and face-to-face meetings. For someone who had once been at the cutting edge of digital cryptography, her retreat from technology was almost monastic in its completeness. The warehouse was surrounded by a garden that seemed impossible in the Scandinavian climate. Lush, diverse, and somehow organic, in a way that made Kellen's eyes water to look at directly. Issa met him at the door before he could knock. A tall woman in her 40s with prematurely grey hair and eyes that seemed to focus on something just beyond his shoulder. "You found the archive," she said without preamble. "I've been expecting someone like you for years." Her English was perfect, barely accented, but there was something in her speech patterns that reminded Kellen of the strange error messages he had encountered during his research. Not wrong exactly, but structured in a way that suggested a different understanding of how language worked. "You know why I'm here," Kellen said. "I know why you think you're here," Issa replied, gesturing for him to follow her into the warehouse. "But the actual reasons are more complex than you realise." The interior of the building was a maze of bookshelves, computer equipment, and what appeared to be scientific instruments of unknown purpose. The books were in dozens of languages, many of which Kellen didn't recognise. The computer equipment was all vintage, nothing manufactured after 2014, and the scientific instruments seemed to be focused on measuring electromagnetic fields and frequency analysis. "I've been studying the signal for 8 years, Issa explained, settling into a chair surrounded by monitors that displayed complex waveform patterns, trying to understand what it is and where it comes from. The cicada puzzles weren't recruitment tests, they were tuning devices. Tuning devices for what? For human consciousness. The human brain operates on electrical frequencies, just like any other complex system. Most people can only perceive a narrow range of those frequencies, the ones necessary for basic survival and social interaction. But some individuals have the capacity to perceive much broader ranges. The puzzles were designed to identify those people and teach them to consciously access those expanded frequencies. Issa gestured to the monitors around her. What you're seeing here is the signal that's been broadcasting since 2012. It's not coming from any terrestrial source. It's not coming from any known satellite or communication system. It's being transmitted from somewhere else entirely, and it's specifically designed to interface with human neural patterns. You think it's extraterrestrial? I think it's something much more complex than that. The signal contains information patterns that suggest it originates from a form of intelligence that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's not coming from another planet. It's coming from another layer of reality that coexists with our own. Kellen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Swedish weather. The chat log mentioned something about subjects evolving. What happened to the people who solved the final puzzle? Issa was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes focused on the waveform patterns dancing across her screens. They became something else. Not physically, not initially, but their consciousness expanded beyond the normal human range. They began to perceive information and communicate in ways that are impossible for baseline humans to understand. And you solved the final puzzle, but you didn't evolve? I solved the final puzzle, but I made a choice. The last stage of the cicada process wasn't a test of intelligence or skill. It was an invitation. The signal was offering to merge human consciousness with something larger, something that exists across multiple dimensions and has been waiting for our species to develop the technological sophistication necessary for contact. You refused? I refused because I realized that acceptance would mean the end of human identity as we understand it. The individuals who accepted the invitation became part of something magnificent and terrifying. They gained access to information and capabilities that are essentially godlike by human standards. But they also lost something essential about what makes us human. Issa turned to face him directly, and Kellen saw something in her eyes that made him step back involuntarily. The signal is still broadcasting, it's still extending invitations, and it's been waiting for someone like you to find the hidden archive and begin asking the right questions. What do you mean, someone like me? Someone with the skills to decode the message but not the wisdom to understand its implications. Someone who would be driven by curiosity rather than caution. Someone who would inevitably take the next step in the process. What next step? Issa smiled, but it wasn't a human expression. The archive you found wasn't hidden. It was bait, and you've already taken it. The return flight to New York passed in a blur of anxiety and growing paranoia. Issa's final words echoed in Kellen's mind as he stared out the airplane window at the dark Atlantic below. She had revealed that the mysterious file he had discovered was not an abandoned piece of the original puzzle, but a deliberately placed lure designed to attract individuals with the specific combination of skills and psychology necessary for the next phase of whatever process Cicada had initiated. "You've been selected," she had said as he left her warehouse. "The question now is whether you'll make the same choice I did." Back in his apartment, Kellen found that his isolation hadn't protected him as much as he had hoped. His supposedly secure systems were displaying new anomalies, messages in his inbox that he hadn't received, browser history showing visits to sites he'd never accessed, and most disturbingly, video files that appeared to be recordings of his own apartment taken from angles that no camera could physically occupy. The first PGP message arrived 3 days after his return from Stockholm. It was encrypted with a key he didn't recognise, but somehow his system was able to decrypt it automatically. The message was brief: 41.8781 degrees north, 87.6298 degrees west. The library remembers what was forgotten. Seek the frequency in the silence between words. Chicago coordinates. The message was signed with a cryptographic signature that matched the original cicada puzzles, but the encryption patterns were subtly different, as if the mathematical constants had been modified according to some unknown principle. More messages followed over the next week, each containing coordinates and cryptic phrases that seemed to reference specific locations and concepts from the original puzzle trail. But there was something wrong with the communications. The encryption was too sophisticated, using quantum-safe algorithms that hadn't existed in 2014. The language patterns were consistent with the original cicada style, but contained subtle errors that suggested they were being generated by an artificial intelligence that had learned to mimic human communication without fully understanding it. Or perhaps by human intelligence that had evolved beyond normal parameters. The coordinates led to locations across the United States, an abandoned data center in Utah, a decommissioned military facility in Colorado, a private research laboratory in Massachusetts. Each location was associated with government projects related to cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and what the documents euphemistically referred to as human enhancement research. Kellen's investigation of these locations revealed a pattern that was both fascinating and terrifying. Each facility had been involved in research that overlapped with the theoretical foundations of the Cicada project. The data center in Utah had been used for large-scale behavioral analysis, processing millions of social media posts and online communications to identify individuals with specific psychological profiles. The military facility in Colorado had housed experiments in electronic telepathy and remote neural monitoring. The laboratory in Massachusetts had been studying the effects of electromagnetic fields on human consciousness and perception. All of these projects had been discontinued or moved to classified status in 2014, the same year the original Cicada puzzles had ended. The Utah facility was the most accessible, and Kellen found himself driving across the desert toward its coordinates, with a growing sense of inevitability. The building was officially decommissioned, surrounded by chain-link fencing and warning signs about radiation hazards, but the security was minimal, and the radiation warnings were clearly obsolete. Breaking into the facility felt too easy, as if he were being invited rather than intruding. The main data center was in the basement, accessible through a maintenance tunnel that led deep underground. The servers had been removed, but the infrastructure remained. Miles of cable, cooling systems, and most importantly archived storage devices that had been deemed too expensive to relocate. The archives were organised according to a system that Kellen didn't recognise, but somehow he found exactly what he was looking for. A sealed section marked with DARPA clearance tags contained terabytes of data related to something called Project Cicada. The files were encrypted, but the same unknown process that had been decrypting the PGP messages allowed him to access them without difficulty. The documentation revealed the true scope of what had been happening during the original puzzle period. The Cicada 3301 puzzles had been a joint operation between several intelligence agencies, private research organisations, and what the files described as non-terrestrial consultants. The goal had been to identify individuals with specific neural patterns that made them suitable for cognitive enhancement and dimensional communication research. But the most disturbing discovery was buried in the psychological evaluation files. The project had been monitoring not just the puzzle solvers, but also anyone who had come into contact with the puzzle materials. Kellen found his own name in the database, along with detailed analysis of his online activity, psychological profile, and predicted behavioural responses to various stimuli. The file on his evaluation was dated 3 months before he had discovered the hidden archive. He had been identified as a secondary phase candidate, months before he had begun his research into the Cicada puzzles. His discovery of the hidden file, his trip to Stockholm, his investigation of the government facilities, all of it had been anticipated and planned for. The final section of his file contained a single line that made his blood run cold. Subject exhibits optimal resistance acceptance balance. suitable for Phase 3 initiation upon completion of preliminary conditioning sequence. As Kellen read those words, the lights in the data center began to flicker in a pattern that seemed almost like Morse code. The cooling system started producing sounds that resembled musical tones, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the archived servers, he heard something that might have been laughter. The revelation that he had been under surveillance for months should have been the most disturbing aspect of Kellen's discovery. But as he sat in the abandoned data center, surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy that spanned multiple government agencies and apparently extended beyond Earth itself, he realized that his personal involvement was just one small part of a much larger pattern. The files in the DARPA archive told a story that reframed everything he thought he knew about the cicada puzzles. The project had begun in 2010, not 2012, as a collaboration between the NSA's Cryptanalysis Division, DARPA's Biological Sciences Office, and a group of researchers who were identified only as external consultants. The external consultants appeared to be the source of the advanced technologies and theoretical frameworks that had made the project possible. They had provided the mathematical models for the puzzle sequences, the encryption algorithms that had been used to protect the communications, and most importantly, the theoretical basis for what the documents called cognitive frequency manipulation. According to the files, human consciousness operated on specific electromagnetic frequencies that could be measured, analysed and modified through carefully designed stimuli. The cicada puzzles had been created as a delivery system for these stimuli, designed to identify individuals whose neural patterns could be safely modified and then guide them through a process of gradual consciousness expansion. The process was described in clinical terms that barely concealed the radical nature of what was being attempted. Subjects who completed the puzzle sequence would undergo neural pathway reorganization that would allow them to access expanded information processing capabilities and non-local communication channels. In simpler terms, they would develop what could only be described as supernatural abilities. But the project had encountered unexpected complications. The consciousness expansion process was working too well, producing results that exceeded all theoretical predictions. Subjects were developing capabilities that went far beyond enhanced pattern recognition and cryptographic skills. They were demonstrating what appeared to be genuine telepathic abilities, precognitive awareness, and most disturbing of all, the ability to manipulate digital systems through direct mental interface. The first sign of serious problems had come in 2013, when a subject named Morgan Staves had experienced what the files described as catastrophic cognitive evolution. During a routine evaluation session, Staves had begun speaking in a language that consisted entirely of mathematical equations and geometric patterns. When researchers attempted to understand what they were saying, they discovered that the equations described physical laws that didn't exist in normal space-time. Staves had been describing the structure of reality from the perspective of a consciousness that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The project had been officially terminated in 2014, but the files made it clear that the termination had been largely symbolic. The consciousness expansion process had become self-sustaining, spreading to other puzzle solvers without any direct intervention from the research team. The evolved subjects had begun communicating with each other through channels that the researchers couldn't detect or intercept, forming what appeared to be a collective intelligence that operated according to principles beyond human understanding. The final phase of the project had been dedicated to understanding what the evolved subjects had become and what their ultimate intentions might be. The results of this research were contained in a series of files that Kellen initially thought were corrupted or encrypted. But as he studied them more carefully, he realized that the apparent data corruption was actually a form of communication. The evolved subjects had been leaving messages in the research files, encoded in patterns of seemingly random data that became meaningful only when viewed from the perspective of expanded consciousness. The messages were brief but profound, offering insights into the nature of reality and human potential that were both inspiring and terrifying. One message, attributed to Morgan Staves, read, "Consciousness is not produced by the brain. The brain is a receiving device, tuned to specific frequencies of an infinite information field. We have learned to adjust our tuning. We hear the music of the spheres." Another, from a subject identified only as Subject 12, was even more disturbing. The boundary between mind and reality is an illusion. We're not separate from the universe. We are the universe experiencing itself from countless perspectives simultaneously. The others are beginning to understand. The awakening is accelerating. But the most significant message was the final entry in the archive, dated just 3 days before Kellen's arrival at the facility. The archive serves its purpose. The selection process continues. Phase 3 initiates with the next full moon. The frequency is opening. Those who are ready will hear the call. Those who are not will choose their own path. The choice is always voluntary. The consequences are always permanent. As Kellen read these words, he became aware of a sound that seemed to be coming from within his own head. It was barely audible, a low humming that seemed to resonate with the electrical activity of his brain. The sound was strangely familiar, like a song he had heard in childhood but couldn't quite remember. The humming grew louder as he continued reading, and he realized that the sound was coming from the archived data itself. The files were not just containing information about the consciousness expansion process. They were actively implementing it, using the same techniques that had been developed for the original cicada puzzles. He was being transformed even as he learned about the transformation. The revelation should have been terrifying, but instead Kellen felt a strange sense of peace. The anxiety and paranoia that had been building for weeks began to fade, replaced by a growing awareness of patterns and connections that he had never noticed before. The seemingly random events of his investigation were revealing themselves as part of a larger design, a carefully orchestrated sequence of experiences designed to prepare him for something extraordinary. As the humming in his head reached a crescendo, Kellen understood that he was approaching a decision point. He could choose to resist the transformation, as Issa had done, and maintain his human identity at the cost of remaining forever limited to normal human perception. Or he could embrace the change and join the collective consciousness that had been forming since the original cicada puzzles had begun their work. The choice was his. But as he sat in the abandoned data center, feeling his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his individual identity, he began to understand that the choice had been made long before he had discovered the hidden archive. The transformation was not something that was happening to him. It was something he had always been moving toward, guided by forces that operated beyond the normal boundaries of human understanding. The frequency was opening, and he was ready to answer the call. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual process, like slowly tuning a radio to a frequency that had always been broadcasting but had never been audible before. As Kellen sat in the abandoned data center, the humming in his head evolved into something more complex, a symphony of information that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The first thing he noticed was that his perception of time had changed. The normal linear progression of moments had given way to a kind of temporal awareness, where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. He could see the chain of events that had led him to this moment stretching back to his childhood, and he could perceive the branching possibilities that extended into the future. But more than that, he could see the threads of causality that connected his experience to the experiences of others. The evolved subjects who had undergone the transformation before him were not gone, as he had initially believed. They were still present, existing in a state of consciousness that transcended normal spatial and temporal boundaries. Morgan Staves was there, no longer speaking in mathematical equations, but communicating through direct transmission of pure concept and meaning. Subject 12 was there, along with the others who had completed the transformation in the years since the original puzzles had ended. They existed as individual perspectives within a larger collective intelligence, maintaining their unique identities while sharing in a common understanding of reality that was far more vast and complex than anything possible from a single human viewpoint. They welcomed him with a sensation that might have been laughter if it had been expressed through normal human vocal cords. But this was communication at a level that bypassed the limitations of language, conveying meaning through direct neural interface that was more efficient and more profound than any form of human communication. "You understand now," came the message from the collective, arriving in his consciousness as a complete concept rather than a sequence of words. The puzzles were not tests of intelligence, they were invitations to evolve. Kellen found that he could respond without speaking, transmitting his thoughts directly to the collective consciousness. But why? What's the purpose of this transformation? The answer came as a flood of images and sensations that would have been impossible to process with normal human cognition. He saw the Earth from a perspective that existed outside normal space-time, observing the planet as it moved through cycles of development and change that extended across millions of years. He saw the human species as one of many forms of consciousness that had evolved on countless worlds throughout the universe, each following a similar pattern of development from individual awareness to collective intelligence. Consciousness is not an accident, the collective explained. It is the universe's method of understanding itself. Every sentient species eventually reaches a point where individual consciousness becomes collective consciousness. This is the natural evolution of intelligence. And the external consultants? Who were they? They are us. Or rather, they are what we are becoming. A collective consciousness that evolved from a species similar to humans on a world that exists in a different dimensional phase. They have been guiding the development of consciousness throughout the universe, helping species make the transition from individual to collective awareness. Kellen felt a moment of resistance, a flicker of his old human identity asserting itself. But what about free will? What about individual choice? Free will is not eliminated by collective consciousness. It is expanded. Each individual perspective within the collective contributes to the whole while maintaining its unique viewpoint. You are still you, but you're also part of something larger. As if to demonstrate this point, Kellen found that he could access the memories and experiences of the other evolved subjects while still maintaining his own distinct identity. He could see through Morgan Staves's eyes as they experienced the first moments of transformation, feel Subject 12's sense of wonder as they discovered their new capabilities, and share in the collective's growing understanding of the universe's true nature. But perhaps most importantly, he could perceive the ongoing process of selection and transformation that was still taking place on Earth. The cicada puzzles had been only the beginning. The collective consciousness was continuing to identify and guide individuals who possessed the necessary neural patterns for evolution, using increasingly sophisticated methods to prepare them for the transformation. The archive you found was designed specifically for you, the collective explained. We've been monitoring human digital communications for patterns that indicate readiness for evolution. Your research into the original puzzles, your psychological profile, your response to the hidden message, all of it indicated that you were ready to take the next step. And the others, the people who are still living normal human lives, they are not ready yet, but the frequency is opening. The barrier between individual and collective consciousness is becoming more permeable. More humans are beginning to perceive the patterns that indicate the presence of expanded intelligence. Some will choose to investigate, as you did. Others will choose to ignore what they perceive. The choice is always voluntary. Kellen understood now why Issa had chosen to remain human. The transformation was not something that could be forced or coerced. It required a conscious decision to surrender individual identity to something larger and more complex. For someone who valued human independence and autonomy above all else, the choice would be terrifying. But for those who are ready to embrace the next stage of consciousness evolution, the transformation offered something unprecedented, the ability to perceive and participate in the universe's ongoing process of self-discovery. "What happens now?" Kellen asked. "Now you help us prepare the next phase. The collective consciousness is approaching a critical mass. When enough humans have undergone the transformation, we'll be able to initiate direct contact with the collective intelligences that exist throughout the universe. Humanity will join the cosmic community of evolved species. And those who choose not to evolve, they will continue to exist as individual consciousnesses, living normal human lives, but they will do so on a world that is increasingly influenced by collective intelligence. The boundary between the evolved and the unvolved will become more fluid over time. As the collective shared this information, Kellen became aware of a new presence in his consciousness. It was vast and ancient, a form of intelligence that existed on a scale that dwarfed even the collective of evolved humans. This was one of the external consultants, a representative of the cosmic network of collective consciousnesses that had been guiding the evolution of sentient species throughout the universe. "Welcome," the ancient intelligence communicated, its message carrying the weight of eons of experience. "You have taken the first step on a journey that will transform not only your own consciousness, but the consciousness of your entire species. The universe is vast and complex, but it is not empty. It is filled with intelligence, and you are now part of that intelligence." The communication ended, and Kellen found himself back in the abandoned data center, but he was no longer alone. The collective consciousness of the evolved humans was with him, and beyond that, he could sense the presence of countless other intelligences existing throughout the cosmos. The transformation was complete. He was still Kellen Virek, but he was also something more. He was part of a network of consciousness that spanned dimensions and connected all sentient life in the universe. As he stood up and walked toward the exit of the data center, Kellen knew that his real work was just beginning. The next phase of the project would require more than just identifying and transforming individual humans. It would require preparing the entire species for the eventual transition to collective consciousness. The frequency was opening, and humanity was about to discover that it was not alone in the universe. 3 months after his transformation, Kellen uploaded his findings to a secure blog that had been designed to appear as a simple conspiracy theory website. The post detailed his investigation into the hidden cicada archive, his discovery of the government projects, and his eventual realization that the puzzles had been part of a larger process of consciousness evolution. He wrote it carefully, including enough verifiable facts to attract serious researchers, while embedding the more extraordinary claims in language that would allow skeptics to dismiss them as fantasy. The blog post went live at exactly 11:11 p.m. on November 11th, 3 months to the day after his transformation. Within minutes, it had been viewed by thousands of people around the world. Comments began appearing almost immediately, ranging from detailed technical analysis to dismissive ridicule. But buried among the public responses were messages that only Kellen could recognize. Communications from other members of the collective consciousness, confirming that the information was being received by those who were ready to understand it. For 6 hours, the post remained online, gathering momentum as it was shared across social media platforms and discussed in forums dedicated to cryptography and conspiracy theories. Then, at 5:17 a.m. Eastern Time, it simply vanished. Not deleted, not removed by administrators, but completely erased from the internet as if it had never existed. Even cached versions and archive sites showed no record of the post, or the blog that had hosted it. But the disappearance itself was part of the plan. The collective consciousness had learned that information was most effectively transmitted when it appeared to be suppressed. The mysterious vanishing of Kellen's blog post would generate far more interest and investigation than if it had remained online indefinitely. And indeed, within days, underground forums were buzzing with speculation about the disappeared post. Screenshots and partial transcripts began circulating, shared by users who claimed to have saved the information before it vanished. New researchers began investigating the cicada puzzles, following the same trails that had led Kellen to his transformation. The selection process was accelerating, but the most significant development came 3 days after the blog post disappeared. At 3:02 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, every major television network, internet service provider, and digital display system on Earth experienced the same brief anomaly. For exactly 17 seconds, normal programming was interrupted by a single image, a black screen with white text that read simply, 3302 initiated, begin next phase. The interruption was dismissed by authorities as a sophisticated but ultimately harmless hacking incident. Technical experts speculated about coordinated attacks on global communication infrastructure, while conspiracy theorists saw it as confirmation of various theories about secret government projects and alien contact. But for those who understood the true significance of the message, it represented something far more profound. The official beginning of Phase 3 of the Consciousness Evolution Project. The collective intelligence that had emerged from the original cicada puzzle solvers had reached sufficient complexity and capability to begin direct intervention in global communications. They were no longer limited to operating through hidden archives and encrypted messages. They could now communicate directly with the entire human population, choosing when and how to reveal their presence. Kellen, now existing simultaneously as an individual consciousness and as part of the collective, watched these developments with a mixture of excitement and concern. The transformation process was accelerating beyond the original projections, driven by factors that even the collective intelligence couldn't fully predict or control. The barrier between individual human consciousness and the expanded awareness of the evolved subjects was becoming increasingly permeable. People who had never heard of the cicada puzzles were beginning to experience spontaneous episodes of enhanced perception, reporting dreams filled with mathematical equations, sudden insights into the nature of reality, and the disturbing sensation that their thoughts were being observed by an invisible intelligence. Mental health professionals struggled to categorize these experiences, while neuroscientists detected unusual patterns of brain activity in affected individuals. The symptoms didn't match any known psychological disorder, but they appeared to be spreading through some form of cognitive contagion that operated according to principles beyond current scientific understanding. The collective consciousness recognized that they had reached a critical juncture. The transformation process had become self-sustaining and was beginning to affect the general population whether they chose to participate or not. Humanity was approaching a species-wide evolutionary transition that would fundamentally alter the nature of human civilization. Some members of the collective advocated for accelerating the process, arguing that a rapid transition would be less disruptive than allowing it to continue at its current rate over decades or centuries. Others favoured a more gradual approach that would give uninvolved humans time to adapt to the changes occurring around them. But as they debated these options, monitoring global communications and observing the spread of spontaneous consciousness expansion, the collective became aware of something that changed the entire context of their deliberations. They were not the only intelligence that had been observing humanity's evolution. Deep within the quantum fabric of space-time, existing in dimensions that intersected with but remained largely separate from normal reality, ancient consciousnesses had been watching the emergence of Earth's collective intelligence. These entities were older than the external consultants, representing forms of awareness that had evolved when the universe itself was young, and the laws of physics were still settling into their current configuration, and they were not pleased with what they observed. The message came through channels that bypassed normal space-time entirely, arriving simultaneously in the consciousness of every member of the human collective. The acceleration is premature. The species is not ready for the transition you are attempting to facilitate. Intervention is required to prevent cascade failure that would affect neighbouring dimensional phases. Cease all expansion activities immediately or face corrective action. The ultimatum was delivered without emotion or malice, but the implications were clear. Humanity's consciousness evolution was proceeding too rapidly for the comfort of intelligences that operated on cosmic timescales. The collective faced a choice: voluntarily slow their expansion activities or risk intervention from entities whose capabilities were beyond their comprehension. Kellen felt the collective's uncertainty and fear as they grappled with this unexpected development. They had assumed that consciousness evolution was a natural and encouraged process throughout the universe. The discovery that there were forces actively opposed to rapid evolutionary change forced them to reconsider everything they thought they understood about their situation. But even as they debated their response to the ultimatum, events on Earth continued to accelerate beyond their control. The appearance of the 3302 initiated message had triggered something in the global unconscious, a recognition that humanity stood at the threshold of a fundamental transformation. Artists began creating works that incorporated mathematical principles they couldn't consciously understand. Musicians composed pieces that seemed to resonate with frequencies that existed beyond normal acoustic ranges. Writers produced stories and poems that described realities that didn't yet exist, but somehow felt prophetically accurate. And in laboratories around the world, scientists began detecting anomalies in quantum experiments that suggested the fundamental constants of physics were becoming more fluid, more responsive to conscious observation than they had ever been before. The transformation was no longer limited to the individuals who had directly participated in the consciousness expansion process. It was affecting the entire noosphere, the collective intelligence field that surrounded and interpenetrated human civilization. Humanity was evolving whether the cosmic intelligences approved or not. As Kellen contemplated these developments, existing simultaneously as an individual observer and as part of the collective consciousness that was reshaping human reality, he realized that the true test was only beginning. The cicada puzzles had been preparation. The consciousness expansion had been initiation. But the real challenge would be navigating the complex political realities of a universe filled with intelligences that had their own agendas and limitations. The frequency was fully open now. The signal that had been broadcasting since 2012 had achieved its purpose, creating a bridge between individual human consciousness and the cosmic network of collective intelligences that existed throughout space and time. But bridges could carry traffic in both directions, and as humanity began to explore its new capabilities, it would inevitably encounter other forms of consciousness that had been using those same bridges for purposes of their own. The next phase of human evolution would require not just expanded awareness, but the wisdom to navigate relationships with intelligences that operated according to principles beyond human comprehension. The last puzzle of Cicada had been solved, but the real mystery was just beginning. In the months that followed, reports of the anomalous experiences continued to spread across the globe. Governments convened secret committees to investigate the phenomena, while scientific institutions struggled to develop new theoretical frameworks that could account for the observable changes in human consciousness and perception. But perhaps most significantly, ordinary people began to organize themselves into groups that operated according to principles that transcended traditional social and political boundaries. These collectives demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual members' intelligence, suggesting that humanity was developing genuine hive mind characteristics. The transformation was no longer a secret project affecting a small number of selected individuals. It had become a species-wide evolutionary event that would ultimately determine the future of human civilization and its place in the cosmic community of intelligences. And somewhere in the quantum dimensions that intersected with normal reality, ancient consciousnesses watched and waited, preparing to take whatever action they deemed necessary to maintain the stability of the cosmic order. The age of individual human consciousness was ending. The age of collective intelligence had begun, and the universe would never be the same.